So I want to start first with this bad mamma jamma. And start by prefacing these comments by referring to the screen behind me. It says, building a sustainable future for Alaska. And one of the things that I think from a meta level that was really impressive to me about our group is that they were willing to play with the model and know that despite a lot of toggling back and forth and trying to figure out how things impacted and essentially pouring water back and forth between glasses to see what we could come up with, at the end of the day, look at all the revenue options we actually have. If you step back from just planning in the red, which is where a lot of our conversation was, there's actually a lot of black that we should be considering in terms of what a sustainable future for Alaska looks like. So just to kind of go through this really quickly, what our group did, we got to green. And we got to green by having a permanent fund dividend cap at $12.50. We had a minimum, we modified the oil and gas taxes with a minimum tax at 10%, a GVR, the new oil tax reduction, natural gas reserves tax, North Slope reimbursable credits, per barrel credit, mining tax at 5%, an income tax at 15%, a sales tax at 2%, and a state lottery. So in that process, and it was not an easy rendering to get there, and by no means would I say that that was something we voted on and everyone was like, yeah, that's great, let's go with that. But rather in the experience of the model, being able to grapple with the consequences of what happens when we change any of these different levers, and being able to get to a point to see that, yes, actually we can meet the revenue gap that's been presented. When we first got started, we had identified that the permanent fund endowment wasn't actually on the list. And so our group fixed that and then shared that information with the other groups. We had a conversation about the price per barrel and decided that taking a conservative number and approach was much better for us in the long term, setting that at $60. We had a discussion about valuing the services, which was all day yesterday, and then coming into actually having to plug the gap. And especially in an environment where our major revenue generator is so unpredictable and getting more so. We also talked about, there was also an interesting conversation about having too much surplus. Yeah. That was actually the point that was raised, too much surplus, and then the counterpoint was, well, then that gets us to a position where we are right now, but now we can actually plan for that. So we don't breed in bad habits moving forward because now we're aware of them and we can actually plan for that. In the experience of placing the dots, when it came to the things that were kind of politically controversial perhaps, an income tax, on the income tax line there were 6 green dots and 4 red ones. On the sales tax, 2 green dots and 2 red dots. And then on the property tax, 4 red dots and 2 green dots. We decided at that point that we were going to add in everything that had a green dot and then subtract out all the ones with a smaller amount of dots before we actually got to dealing with the red dots. And that helped us move from a place of really starting to get sticky over each of the different line items or options and move to a place of actually being able to see how the model would work if we were willing to play with it. Another point that was raised actually in the conversation was to ensure that we don't forget that this is not a vote, that this is in fact a model and it's an exercise and it's an opportunity to see what we could come up with rather than feeling as if we were making decisions today about the future, and it really helped people free up. Some of the concerns that were raised were about impacts on regular people. I think that was something that was mentioned yesterday as well, and I think the comment yesterday was it's a room full of haves making decisions about have-nots. And so there was a concern about regular people. There was a concern about the impact on municipalities. concern about our rural communities and the impact on lower income families. There was an issue of trust as well. There was some trust about the role between governments in the state. One of the cautions that was mentioned, and you're going to be surprised at this, politics. The question was asked, are there any political dead on arrivals in this model? And the response was, every box. Another concern that was raised was about the disparity of the cook inlet taxes, currently having to be made up by the state, which is great for South Central, but causes a disparity for everybody else around the state. There was a conversation about the consequences of SB 21 and the impacts within the model itself. So some of the technical aspects of the model, some of the issues that were run into, and I think that they're going to continue to refine the model so Alaskans can play with that some more. And another concern was identified, and that's that there needs, let me see if I can read my writing, that there's a clear need to incentivize new production in Alaska. And one last point, in terms of toggling between the different options, there was an impact with gaming and the lottery because of where we were in the model. And a concern was raised over whether a study or any studies have been launched into the impact of a lottery on how that would carry over into the charitable gaming receivers, tribes, nonprofits, et cetera. And then instead of kind of diving further into that, we went into toggling between the mining tax and the lottery, and they had almost the equivalent impact based on where we were. So in short, it was a really great exercise. Our group was really willing to get into the process. On a personal note, it would be wonderful to be able to see what other Alaskans, especially our brothers and sisters out in rural Alaska and in our villages, what decisions they might make if they had the opportunity to sit with a resource, our revenue resource, and a facilitator to go through the process. I think that we might see substantially different kinds of analysis while at the same time increasing the knowledge for our decision makers. So, Ganesh Chishawa.